what I wanted to do is just go through who we are. The Blackstone LaunchPad is a free resource on campus for you as an alum or as a student or staff. We are free. We don't take any equity in what you do. I'm going to go through just a couple slides really quickly before we get started with the workshop to share who we are and how we can be of benefit to you. Who am I? Again, I'm the program director at the Blackstone LaunchPad. I became an entrepreneur sort of haphazardly because I wanted a good school for my kids, and I wasn't finding that in Philadelphia. So I founded the Wissahickon Charter School. We're a K-8 charter school in the Germantown neighborhood of Philadelphia. We have 800 students. We started in 2002. That's my baby. It's this. You can see the picture here. It's at the corner of Roberts and Wissahickon Avenue. We've got 2 campuses now, one other one on Washington Lane and Chew. I'm also the co-founder and a board president of Germantown United Community Development Corporation. We are a nonprofit organization, started in 2012 with a popcorn machine and a movie projector. Now we have a budget of $800,000 and a staff of 5. We support the commercial corridors in the neighborhood of Germantown, which you can probably tell I'm from Germantown. It's my favorite neighborhood in Philadelphia. But anyway, that's who I am. Have been at Temple since 2015, running the Blackstone LaunchPad. We support entrepreneurs, and how do we do that? I will go into that. Let's see. So again, we do it in primarily 3 different ways. One is one-on-one mentorship. So we do a lot of coaching. You can set up an appointment with us, and Haja will post in the chat ways to set up an appointment with us. We see where you're at, where you want to go, and I will go into that in a moment. We also have events like this. We want to make sure that we provide resources for you around startup activities. So we do things such as marketing, branding, financing, nonprofit, corporate formation, legal issues and startups, etc. So you can look for our events. Once you are with us, which you are now, you will be added to our email list, and so you'll get notifications of our events that we have throughout the semesters. The other is resources. So a lot of what we do is customized, and we try to connect you to things in the region that would be advantageous to your adventure. So a lot of it, as I mentioned, is customized. So it really depends on what you're working on. We try to be that connector that can introduce you to people, events, resources, money, etc. So this is us. We have workshops, as I'd mentioned. These are some of the topics that we cover. Access is key. As a Temple Owl, you have access to everything that is an owl in Philadelphia, and there's 450,000 alum around, and they want to be helpful. So we try to provide that connections. Here's a view of some of our ventures that we've worked with. I'm going to go into a couple in a moment. Again, we're totally free. We don't cost anything. We don't take any equity. You don't have to study. You can just come meet with us and get our resources. Somebody that we helped, I started working with Jared in 2017 in November. He came to us. He had just been laid off from his job. He was working on his master's degree. He was a master chef. He had an idea for a company that provided healthy foods through a vending machine, and Simply Good Jars was born in November of 2017. If you watch Shark Tank, you probably saw him last Friday. He pitched to them. He had already raised $1.8 million for the company and had 28 employees up and down the East Coast. But Mark Cuban and Lori Briner partnered with him, and he received sort of support from Shark Tank. So check out him on Shark Tank. Pound Cake is a woman we worked with and continue to work with. She has a lipstick line for people of all colors. We worked with her on a crowdfunding campaign and some trademarking issues. So we work with supporting folks in a lot of different areas. We connected her to a lawyer we're connected with, and they helped her pro bono file for trademark protection. So this is how you reach us. And again, Haja will be posting things in the chat as we go as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to pull up. How many of you, can you share in the chat, are entering the Be Your Own Boss poll? So what we're going to focus on today is a really practical approach to financial projections. We're going to use the Be Your Own Boss Ball template so that you get a sense of how you can go about doing your projections. And we're going to do an example, and we're going to use Uber as our example. And I'm going to ask for your input in terms of what things we should include. So this is the template that the Be Your Own Boss Ball suggests using. You can use this for any, forgive me, please. I've got both incoming phone calls as well as construction going outside my house, so I apologize in advance. This is the template that the Be Your Own Boss Bowl suggests using for the competition. So that's what we're going to build off of today. If you have questions at all while we go, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that as well. Your participation is appreciated. So this is the first tab is the instructions. I would encourage you to read them carefully. They're asking you for a 3-year budget projection, with the first year being a month by month and the second 2 years being quarterly. And that's a little bit tricky when you're building out your spreadsheet, because in the second and third years, you need to make sure that everything you do is multiplied by 3. And we'll go through that in terms of how to build out those formulas and things as we go along. You see three tabs: instructions, forecast, and assumptions. Forecast are the numbers you're going to put into your budget. So those are the things that are going to show what your expenses are, or revenue are, what your expenses are, et cetera, and what your bottom line is. Your assumptions is what you're assuming as you put those numbers in. And this tab is particularly important. And the judges that are looking at your submission, or investors, if you're submitting a budget for investing consideration, or even yourself, assumptions are really, really important, because you can put numbers in and you're going to forget as you go along why you put that particular number in. Your assumption is a record of why you chose that particular number. So we're going to go through and I'll show you sort of why that is important. So let's go to the forecast tab.
Could you zoom in a little bit?
Yes.
The fonts.
I'm at 125. Is that better? I can go a little bit further if you want.
I think that's good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So again, it's a 3-year forecast. So you'll put your name in here. Obviously, you put your company name in here. You'll see that it's January 2021. These are the month by months that you go along here. Then it turns into quarters in year 2 and year 3. So at the top, you have your drivers. We're going to use as our example, for our company name, we're going to use Uber. So we're going to pretend Uber hasn't been invented yet and that we're the inventors of Uber. Wouldn't that be great? So you're going to first start out by your drivers. So you have this idea to start this car sharing driving company. Your drivers are basically how you're going to make money. So you could have one driver, you could have 2 drivers. In our case, at this point, I've identified one driver, and that's ride shares. All right, so we're going to have drivers that are going to take people places. We're basically taking over the taxi industry. So your driver would be a ride share. If you were a product, it might be, you might have belts, and you might have shoes. You might have, so that would be, your driver is how are you going to make money? It could be, you're going to be a subscription model. If you're an app, you could be a premium model. So that's how are you going to make money? It's not necessarily your specific product. So down here, you have your products. So for Uber's sake, we have a variety of things, right? The primary one that they started with was UberX, right? So we're gonna put UberX here. Then they went to Uber Black. Then they added what, Uber XL or Uber, let's add Uber Pets. And we're not going to go into all of their iterations as they grew, but let's go to Uber Eats. We'll add. So this is just their revenue streams. And so you can delineate their revenues based on these particular product lines. So we're going to build out our revenue first. So in the instructions for the Be Your Own Boss Bowl, it says if you haven't yet sold anything, start in May of 21. So that's what we're going to do. So let's say we're starting our idea in May of 21. We're going to start out with our first product line of UberX. So what we're going to think about is, when are we going to start making revenue? So we start in May 21. We might advertise here and advertise here because we need to attract both riders and drivers, right? So we're going to need a couple months to get started. So let's assume that our first revenue is going to come in July of 21. Then we need to think about, okay, let's say, how many rides do we get? Let's say we did some advertising in May and June, and we got invited to attend Good Morning America, and we blew up. And so let's say, for the sake of our purposes, that we got 10,000 rides in July of 21. So we need to create a formula that says, of the 10,000 rides that we get in July of 21, how much money do we get from that? So we're going to create a formula here that says equals 10,000. And then we need to decide, okay, what's the average ride that we're going to get? What's the average cost of a ride? So let's say we think it's $15. And when you're building a budget, you're always going to be wrong. So feel comfortable with being wrong, because you can always adjust, and I'm going to show you how. So we have a formula in here, and I would encourage you, when you're building out your spreadsheets, to always use formulas, because that's how you can change them. So here we're going to get in July of 21, $150,000, because we have 10,000 rides at $15 a piece on average. So what I need to do now is go back to my assumptions sheet and input that assumption. So I'm going to assume, and this is really, really important, because this is what the judges are going to look at, because they're going to look at why you made that decision and what your thinking was. They want to see that you've made realistic but ambitious goals for your company. So I'm going to assume in July, started with 10,000 rides at an average of $15. So if I change that, I need to go back and change my assumption, right? So if I figure, oh, that wasn't right, I need to go back and fix that assumption, but let's start there. So then we think, okay, so we've got 10,000 rides for UberX in our first month. We blew up on Good Morning America. We're continuing to advertise. How fast are we going to grow? So we can make an assumption that we're going to grow 20% a month, which is ambitious, but let's say we're going to do that. So we need to build another formula into August that says our growth equals this plus this times 0.20, so 20% growth month over month. So the next month we make 180,000. With Excel, what you can do is then take that, and if you look at that little black box in the bottom corner, you can pull that over and build that out so that you see that by December, you're making $373,000 a month, and for a total of 1.489 million for the year. So that's that product line. So let's figure, oh man, we're doing so good. Let's introduce another line. So let's say Uber Black. Let's go for the really exclusive folks. So by October, let's say we've discovered that we're hitting a really nice pace that we want to add another product line. So we want to add Uber Black in October. So then we need to add that product line. And what did I not do that I should have done? I should have gone to my assumptions right? And added another line saying, assuming
Could you make the zoom a little larger for this page as well?
yes. It's not allowing me to.
If you click out of the cell, maybe,
Yeah.
and then, yeah.
So assuming 20% growth. So it's really important to always go back to your assumptions and add the assumptions in as you go. So if I were smart, I would also add into my assumptions, adding Uber Black in October of 21. Adding Uber Black October. All right, so now we're going to add Uber Black. We're going to assume that we have, let's say, 5,000 rides of Uber Black. And that's probably going to be more per ride because that's more exclusive. So we said 15 for the other, we're going to say 20 for that. So it's going to show the additional growth, but how will that impact us? If we're introducing Uber Black, it might be cutting into our Uber X traffic, right? So maybe what we want to do then is change our 20% growth to 15% growth for Uber X, just to account for the competition between our own products. So you can see we can change anything. We can make it a 25% growth. We can make it 15% growth. You just need to make sure that you can explain what you're doing. So I need to go back in my assumptions, right? And go back and change that to assuming 15% growth after introduction of Uber Black. So this is cumbersome, but it's really, really important. And I can't underscore that enough. And not only just for the judge's understanding, but for your own, because as you get all these numbers, it gets really confusing. So here we have all this revenue. And if you look down at the bottom line, we're flush. Look at us. We've made $1 million, $1.2 million in our first year. But what we haven't taken into consideration is our expenses. So we're going to focus on that a little bit now. But I want to talk for a minute about total cost of goods sold. The cost of goods sold is a really confusing concept. What that is a formula that says your inventory at the beginning of the month, how much material you purchased to make more inventory, minus what you sold. So if in our instance, we don't really have inventory, so we're not going to pay attention to these line items at this point because that doesn't apply to our product. But if you have a widget, for instance, you would need to pay attention to that. So how many pencils do you have in stock right now? How much material did you need to purchase to make more pencils? And how many pencils did you sell? That's basically the formula that you would use for cost of goods sold. So let's look now at our expenses. So what kinds of things? We worked on this a little bit yesterday. So we need to pay our drivers, right? Let's say, what percent do we think we need to pay our drivers of our total profit of a $15 ride? How much should go to a driver? Let's say 30%, right? We want to be fair. We're a good company. So what we're going to do is build another formula out that says equals our gross margin times 0.30. So we're going to build that out toward the end. And so we have our cost of paying our drivers. But what do we know? So here we are in July, but to launch our business and to get on Good Morning America, we had to do a bunch of things before that. So one of the things we would need to have done would be advertising, right? People need to have known about us. So let's build in some expenses in the months before that. This is probably really cheap, but I'm going to put in $50,000 in advertising before we even got to here. We also had to have a website, right? Websites aren't cheap. Let's put in another 50,000. And I'm making up numbers. And what am I not doing that I should be doing right now? I should be going over to this assumptions sheet and adding in those pieces of information. So I assumed 30% payment drivers. I am assuming advertising costs through and think about as much detail as you can provide in these assumptions is helpful to both the judges as well as you, because you think, you know, where are you advertising? Online, Facebook, PR firms, etc. Is again as much detail as you can provide. Website development outsourced, and I'm not going to worry about my spelling at this point. So again, keep going back, toggling back between the two spreadsheets or the tabs. So here we've got our pre-deal. Let's say we're bootstrapping it, so we're not paying rent. We're living in our mom's basement. We don't have any personnel costs because we're not paying ourselves at all. We're, you know, sponging off our mom again. So here we are, we make it to July, and then all of a sudden we have to start paying people. We've got some income, but we have to start now being real. So let's build in some rent. Let's say we're renting a space for $20,000. We're going to build that out through the year as our expense. And again, now we're going to go back to our assumptions and assume $20,000 rent for 10,000 square feet. As much detail as you can provide in these assumptions is good. And again, just always remember that these are guesses, and what you want to show to judges and to your investors is that these guesses are realistic and based on information. So we're going to, let's say now we can hire somebody, right? We want to pay ourselves, and we can hire a couple staff members, maybe a business developer. So let's put in some personnel, some monthly. Let's say we've got $20,000 in personnel costs. We can build that out. And we want to go again, then we want to put into our assumptions, assume personnel addition of 2 people in July. And then once we add in, then we want to think, okay, well, we've done so well. We've added Uber Black here. We probably need more people because we're getting more riders and are more drivers and riders. So let's add in another person after we add in Uber Black. So let's add another $40,000 for our personnel here. And then we want to go back to our assumptions and say added additional marketing staff in October for Uber Black. let's say we have then also advertising is going to continue, right? That's probably one of our largest line items. So we'll add that, continue. But let's say when we launch Uber X, we want to increase our advertising budget to attract more people. So we want to increase that to $60,000. So we would want to then go back to our assumptions and say increased advertising in October to promote Uber Black. So then what we want to do is continually look at our bottom line. So here we're in the negative. We've got a positive income flow here. We're doing pretty good, actually. Don't be surprised as a startup that you have negative numbers. These are surprisingly positive, probably because I haven't included everything that I should be including. You want to make sure that your expenses includes everything you possibly think of, because the judges are going to sit there and think of what you haven't thought about. So servers are going to be huge for us, right? Because most of our company is working online and storing information and communications between users and drivers. So let's build in some server costs. So let's say initially it's going to be $10,000 a month, as we have no users at this point. But then as we get users, it's going to grow. This is something I built in yesterday. The formula is picking that up. We had assumed originally a 25% growth. Up here, we assumed a 20% growth. So I'm going to change that. So our server use is based on our drivers and our ridership. So you can build in these formulas and add in other expenses as you need to. So as you change, let's say that you are all of a sudden you realize, okay, I was on Good Morning America, but now I'm now hugely popular on all social media platforms and I blew up. And I think that rather than having a growth of 15%, I'm actually going to have a growth of 25%. So you can go back into your formulas and change it to, here's 20%, I'm going to change it now to 25%. And then you can go in and change it and then build it out through the whole spreadsheet. And then you need to go back into your assumptions and change that to 25% growth. So now we have our first year built out. We're doing really well, actually. I should probably change the numbers so we're not doing quite so well. But you can see as you change them. So let's change it to well, we don't need to change it. Mostly what you're going to find out is that your numbers are negative down here for the first year. And don't be surprised if it's like that for the first year and a half. That's not a problem. When you're building out your second and third years, you need to be careful that you note that, one cell is now 3 months as opposed to 1 month. So if we're going to continue on from December and move it over to Q1, and we want to continue the growth that we had at 25%, which is really, really high, we would then just copy the cell. This would be equals this plus this times, what was it, 20%? And then we need to say times 3, because now we're representing a quarter as opposed to a month. And this is the same, this is good. So you do the same thing with your expenses. So it equals this plus parentheses this. Wait. Wait, I'm trying to think, how are we doing this one? Okay. So equals this times 3 times 3. That's not right. Sorry. See, it gets really complicated. You need to always follow sort of what you're doing, keeping your assumptions and going. So this line item is paying our drivers. Oh, so okay, so it's a third of this. So this equals this times point. Hold on, give me a moment. Okay, this equals this times, so that's a third of our drivers. So a third of our revenue goes to our drivers. But then I made a mistake, right? Because it needs to be times 3. So again, then I would go back in and I would say my assumptions. So then you decide, okay, we're doing really, really well. We're going to add Uber Pets in quarter 2 of 2022. So let's say we assume that it's not going to be a huge driver for us because how many people transport their pets not by themselves. So we're going to maybe assume that there's 1,000 pet trips and that's going to be $15 a trip. So then we need to go in and change our formulas. Oops. And then also go back into our assumptions saying that we introduced Uber Pet in quarter 2 of 2022 with 1,000 rides at $15. And the important thing here is that, again, you're never going to be right in your projections, and and it's always fluid. You'll always be changing your projections. The important thing is that your projections are based on realistic, well thought out, practical and explainable ideas. So, if you go in your Uber and you say, oh, we're going to sell 1 million rides in our first month, an investor is going to laugh at you because that's not going to be the case. Your growth needs to be incremental. It needs to be explainable based on your expenses. So if you say, when I have 1 million rides in your first month, you need to show that you have the advertising behind you, you've got the website developed, you've got the marketing, you've got the personnel behind you that's going to be able to actually make that happen. If you're unrealistic, then investors are going to, number one, have questions, but also have doubts. So, being as complete as you possibly can, making sure that your assumptions are well documented, playing around with it, seeing what your models are. So, we've built this out based on I think a 20% growth, what happens if you have a 10% growth? What happens, which is probably more realistic. I was probably very unrealistic in assuming a 20% growth, particularly in the first year. You need to play around with it and show it to people and see what they think about it. See what all the expenses, we're probably missing many expenses here, like administrative costs, legal costs, bookkeeping, accounting costs. You need to build in insurance and a variety of things. It's really dependent on your product, but being as complete as possible and realistic are important. This is one example. If you have different kinds of businesses, you're going to have different kinds of spreadsheets. So if you have a product, it's going to be different than a service. If you have an app, it's different than other companies. So I'm going to stop here and see what questions that you might have based on things that you guys are working on. And I would encourage you, I'm happy to sit with you individually, particularly if you're entering the Be Your Own Boss Bowl, to help you create your projections. Because it's not an easy thing to do if you're not, I'm not a finance person. I learned this through my work. And I'm happy to be helpful to folks moving forward. So with that, if there are questions, I'm happy to entertain them. Great. Well, Hajra posted in the chat how to get in touch with us. I would encourage you to make an appointment. If you want to meet this week and you can't make an appointment through our link in Startup Tree, I'm going to put my email in chat. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can put this in the chat. Put my email in the chat, send me an email, and I'm happy to meet. Great. Well, have a great day, guys. If you're entering the Be Your Own Boss Bowl, good luck. We're happy to help too. This is recorded, so we will send a copy to everybody tomorrow. We'll also send a copy of the spreadsheet so you can have that as well. Question about how we can make a projection if we don't know the price. That's key. You need to make an educated guess. You need to figure out what your materials costs are, how much it costs in labor to create it, and how much of a profit margin that you want to have. And there's some standards based on the product that you're developing, so I can talk with you in more depth based on specifically what you're doing. But again, we'll send out the copy of the spreadsheet. We'll send out the copy of this presentation. And what I can do is I can include the assumptions. What I'll do is I'll save this particular spreadsheet that we created, although it's not very realistic, but it includes all the assumptions. So we'll send that with you tomorrow. So thanks everybody for coming today. Have a great day. And we look forward to working with you in the future. Bye.